Spoiler warning. The following video contains spoilers for the first 2 episodes of Plur1bus. You have been warned. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of George Reviews. On this episode, we'll be discussing the new Vince Gilligan project show series, Plur1bus, starring Rhea Seehorn. Let's get into it, shall we? So Plur1bus is the new series from the mastermind Vince Gilligan from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, as well as some other great things. Creator extraordinaire Vince Gilligan is back with another series on Apple TV, starring Rhea Seehorn from Better Call Saul fame, as well as some other great stuff. But the basic premise and the kind of, tease of the series is basically the most miserable person on earth must save humanity from happiness. That sounds very intriguing, very interesting, very absurd and abstract, so to speak. And so I was very taken by the premise, as well as the possibility of a new Vince Gilligan series starring Rhea Seehorn. I love Kim Wexler from Better Call Saul. She's one of my most cherished characters I've ever witnessed on any television show or film. I love to see Rhea Seehorn reunite and reconnect with Vince Gilligan for this project. And I've heard about this project a few years back. I was very excited at the possibility of this series. It was coming to Apple TV Plus, so that's another streaming service I have to sign up for. Gosh darn it, but it was definitely worth it because Plur1bus is fucking amazing. I fucking loved both of these 2 episodes dropped on Friday, and I was just so astounded by the quality, by the premise, by where the show's going, and why I didn't know where the show was actually really going to. But when it arrived in these 2 episodes, I was just flabbergasted in the best way. I fucking love this show. I'm hooked in. I'm already on board for wherever he wants to go with this. Just take my money, Vince Gilligan and Apple TV. Just fucking take it. I am on board for whatever this goes or whatever this ends up being. And needless to say, I fucking love the show so far. I think it's really unique. It's very dark. It's very funny. It's very tragic. All those things kind of combined. And a lot of people were saying this was one of the best pilots ever made. I was very, not skeptical, but just very cautious. Because when people start overpraising something, I get very cautious into thinking, is this going to be for me? Is this going to be more for the masses of general audiences? I consider myself a very niche audience person when it comes to content or films or shows or whatever. I just feel like, what I love this isn't necessarily what other people will not, be overjoyous for. But needless to say, I am overjoyous for Plur1bus. Let's talk about Vince Gilligan. Now, I've been following Vince Gilligan for a very, very, very long time, ever since I was a wee lad growing up on shows like The X-Files. He was a writer, and I think it was episodes like Pusher and Paper Hearts that really made me pay attention to his name. Every time he'd write an episode, I get really excited. He might have not starred The X-Files. He wasn't the creator. He wasn't the showrunner, but he was very much the heart of The X-Files. Every episode he wrote was genius. Even in not so great seasons, he wrote some of the most amazing episodes that the show ever produced, and Revival was definitely missing his voice, and that's why it probably wasn't that great, if I'm being completely honest, but that's neither here nor there. So needless to say, I love Vince Gilligan. I feel like at this point he can do no wrong. I love Breaking Bad. I love Better Call Saul, even though he kind of co-created and shared the reins with Peter Gould, who's actually a consultant on this show, which I was really excited to hear. I see a lot of names in the credit from the Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul verse in terms of the creative team. So I'm very excited. He's kind of reusing some of the same people and bringing some new ones too to keep it fresh, keep it exciting. But we're going to discuss the first 2 episodes that I've dropped, the only episodes that I've dropped. I really wish I could binge this whole thing, honestly, and just talk about the whole season. They want to distribute this week to week, which I have no problem with, and I was very happy after the first episode to know that there's a second episode just waiting for me to stream and watch and experience. Let's talk about Beyond the Premise, or in the premise in more detail. So basically we have this writer, Carol, played by Rhea Seehorn. She really does not like the stuff she's writing. She calls it mindless crap. It's very like romance, fantasy type stuff. Not that I'm a well-read person, but it's definitely not really for me when it comes to literature or whatever. And it's definitely not for her because she really feels not like a fraud, but just like, oh my God, I have to sell the persona of me that's excited about making these books for people and stuff like that. So I was very appreciative of her cynical nature, of her apathetic nature, for her own audience, for her own work. I was very excited that, you know, she's described as the most miserable person, most cynical person in the world, has to save humanity from happiness, so to speak. But basically, there's this alien transmission that is a virus or technology. We're really not into the nitty-gritty of what it actually is yet, but we get enough information to kind of know what sets up this premise. So basically these group of scientists find this thing and it overtakes them literally. You know, they get it from a test rat subject and it bites into one of the scientists. They are then overtaken and catatonic at first. They basically transfer this thing through saliva, through kissing. Basically, this thing is spreading to a multitude of people throughout the entire world. And, you know, there's a countdown. It starts from like 40 something days to 20 something days. And then we get the actual overtaken invasion of the human race. This is the first episode, We Is Us, and it sets up where Carol's at a bar. She's having a drink. She has a breathalyzer on her car, so her partner slash wife, Helen, has to drive her around basically so she can drink and things like that. You know, very troubled character. I wouldn't say unlikable. I think some people might find her unlikable, but I really don't find her unlikable. I just find that, you know, she's a very apathetic and cynical person. I'm a very apathetic, cynical person, so I really relate with Carol in a lot of ways. And so then this thing spreads like an outbreak. People are becoming catatonic, people crashing in their cars. This, you know, alerts Carol, and she sees her partner Helen collapse in front of her, and she becomes catatonic. Basically, almost everyone besides Carol and a few select others, which we'll get into in episode 2, are taken by this thing. And, you know, she tries to get her partner some help. Her partner and Helen ends up dying, you know, in a very tragic circumstance. She tries to get her help at a hospital, but everyone is very catatonic and possessed by this thing until they aren't. And then this thing kind of overtakes them as the same being, as the same thoughts and things. Everyone is one. You know, it says it so in the title. We is us. We are one. We communicate through each other, and everyone knows everything about everything, basically. You know, the entire human race. And, you know, there are some casualties besides Helen. And Carol ends up going, you know, taking her dead partner back to their home, holding up over there, and she then communicates through her television. A government official who isn't really in charge. There's no one really in charge. You know, everyone kind of takes the same level of authority, or, you know, just being helpful but not demanding or in control, even though this thing is in control of everyone. And basically they explain what happened, that, you know, some scientists got this virus or this technology and it spread to the human race, and now everyone is one. Everyone has the same basis of knowledge, same basis of emotion. Everyone is calm, but Carol is not having it. She is immune from it, as well as 11 other people, which we find out more in the second episode. And she is clearly very upset and distraught. The love of her life just died in front of her, and, you know, she's very angry and upset. Kind of builds off the premise of the series to open up so many doors of possibility of what could happen, what could be, what kind of conversations the show could bring out. You know, a lot of people, when I say a lot of people, you know, there's people on Twitter and things like that. I haven't read any like major publication reviews or anything, but a lot of people are, you know, comparing, you know, to the way people are embracing AI, and there are some of us that don't embrace AI, myself included. I don't really think that's Gilligan's intent with AI. I mean, he said he wrote this before AI was a major toxicity as it is now. He definitely has his pulse on the zeitgeist of what's happening right now, and I for one, even if it wasn't his intention, I for one applaud him for just being as brilliant as as he is by bringing this premise to life. And, you know, the series is beautifully shot. The color grading is amazing. The editing is great. great. The sound design, the music by Dave Porter, returning to collaborate with him once again, which is great. And, I couldn't even really recognize it was Dave Porter because, it seems to have a different type of, more of a budget, different type of music and sounds, which I really, really appreciated. And Rhea Seehorn has never been better. She's very underrated as an actor, in my opinion. She definitely fell on the radar for most of Better Call Saul, getting a nomination in their last year, which was a travesty to the Academy and the Emmys and everything, but whatever. I really feel like she cannot be ignored here with this performance. The anger, the rage, the sadness, the cynicism, the apathy that she brings to this character. It's mainly in the writing, but it's also in the performance. You have to mirror and marriage those two things together to make it work. And Rhea Seehorn makes it work beautifully. I just completely loved her performance in both these episodes. She's just astounding. We get kind of a supporting cast, at least so far, mostly of guest stars. Everything is really on Carol, which I think is good to kind of simplify it on one character. We get another character is kind of her guide, so I'm sure she will be a supporting recurring character. But as far as recurring characters, it's really too early to tell. But I love that we're having to focus on Carol, so Rhea Seehorn can really, stretch her acting muscles, really flex, and bring in beautiful performance after beautiful performance. Every frame is just beautiful. Every spoken word of dialogue is just amazing. Everything about it I just truly love. And I wasn't sure if I was going to come into this loving it, but I did. And I have, and I rewatched the episodes. I watched reactions to the episodes. I just can't get enough of it. I really, wish this would just drop all at once. But also, I'm along for the ride. I like to, maybe digest it more week after week. So definitely expect videos of me kind of going through each episode as it drops. But that's kind of episode 1 in a nutshell. We Is Us. We get the premise, we get it kind of explained, but there's still a lot of mystery to it, which is a great balance to have, to strike. And I think Gilligan did a really great job at striking that balance. But we get episode 2, Pirate Lady, basically the aftermath. It's been a few hours since the events of episode 1. Everyone's kind of cleaning up dead bodies and things like that. And we get introduced to this lady who goes to Carol to help her, to offer some water, trying to bury the body of her wife, Helen. And she obviously doesn't trust this thing, and she realizes that this person, this being, was kind of constructed for her from her novel. The male love interest was actually supposed to be female, and she definitely sparks a resemblance to the arts of the character, of the drawing on the cover and everything. And so this person, we'll call her Pirate Lady because her actual character name, which we find out later in the episodes, escaping me right now, is here to kind of guide her through, to bring her help when she needs it. And she doesn't want to accept the help, but she ultimately does. And then Carol's anger becomes very volatile to this character. She kind of pushes her and screams at her. And then we find out that Carol's anger is actually a superpower to a detriment, that, it creates destruction and death to a lot of people, which we find out it's in the millions, which is very, very interesting. Having, your anger projected at, obviously it affects other people's emotions, but these people aren't like over emotional beings. It very much makes her sick to the point where she throws up in their backyard after she finds out that, her anger caused death and destruction and whatnot. So she wants to get together with the other beings who are immune to this, to kind of find a solution to this issue. And so she's able to meet these different people, a wonderful, cast of different characters. Most are friendly, one is not. It was definitely interesting, kind of round table. One is flying on Air Force One. He's like this very suave Casanova type guy who feels like there's nothing wrong with what's happening, that people seem to be happy, hence the premise that Carol needs to save the world from happiness. But with that happiness becomes the stripping of individuality, of individual thought, of individual personality. Carol brings all this up very well and very interesting, and it brings up a lot of interesting discussion about what makes us unique, what makes us human. And I think this is going to touch on a lot of different philosophical questions and philosophical, meanings of what it means to have a personality, a soul, or whatever, whatever you want to call it. And I just found that really like the biggest strength of the show so far to me. And then, this is the point, where Carol finds that her anger caused millions of deaths. The inciting incident of this thing, invading, the people becoming pod people, also killed millions of people. And so this obviously upsets Carol to the point where she drinks heavily and she's just, losing herself, and she gets angry again and more people die. And then, she just collapses and wakes up in a hotel where the, let's call him Suave Casanova guy, wants to talk with her and says he's gotten to know Pirate Lady. He wants her to board his Air Force One or whatever, his plane. She needs basically her permission to do this so he can, add her to the slew of women that he's fucking, and this kind of brings on different meanings of what consent is. Can these people actually consent? Are they just doing this in servitude, or is there something else there? This is very interesting, and this upsets Carol. This guy is just fucking these pod people, just, like disposable sex dolls, and it obviously infuriates Carol. It should infuriate everyone, but, obviously some people won't see it that way, I'm sure. At the end, she decides that she doesn't want to leave Pirate Lady in the hands of the Suave Casanova guy. So she goes out of her plane, she stops the other plane, and that's where the episode ends. And just really strong first two episodes, both written and directed by Vince Gilligan, which was a great to see him in the director's chair more and more and more. I think he's a great director. He directed some of the best episodes of Breaking Bad, best episodes of Better Call Saul, and now this. So, even if he chose to write and direct all the episodes, I would have no problem with that. But, hopefully, we get some other unique voices in here as well. Not to say his voice isn't unique. It very is. Just to kind of see the direction and the flow of this writer's room is going to be. And I just, I could not be more excited. I'm loving this show. I can't get it out of my head. I think it's really amazing, and I'm along for the ride wherever it goes. I think that everyone should be watching this series. What are you doing? Cancel your Netflix. Fuck Stranger Things. The millionth season of a 5-year wait for the new Stranger Things. Just give Apple TV a chance. Give Plur1bus a chance, because it is really, really great. It's really, really amazing. I couldn't recommend it enough. And yeah, those are my thoughts on Plur1bus so far. I'm really excited to get into the next few episodes. Looks like we got 10 episodes, so we got 8 more this season. It looks like it's already greenlit for season 2. And Vince Gilligan recently said in an interview you could see it going for 4 seasons or however long Rhea Seehorn would like it to go. He's basically kind of putting this in her hands, and she's doing a phenomenal job. First Kim Wexler, now this, just give her the Emmy already. Pay for your sins of not nominating her enough for Better Call Saul by giving her an Emmy. What do you think of Plur1bus? Have you seen it? Let me know down there in the comments below, please. I would love to get a conversation and a dialogue going about this show. I think a lot of people are talking about it right now. I want to continue the conversation. I want this to keep going because I want this show to do very, very well. I don't want it to get canceled. So please, get Apple TV, watch Plur1bus, let's talk about it. But please always remember to like and subscribe if you be so kind. My name is George Ray. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. I really appreciate it. Really, really, really. Please remember to keep calm, keep cool, keep chill, embrace great cinema, embrace Plur1bus. I'll see you on the next video. Until then, peace out.